Today, in our current time, one of the most important features of the dollar is that it is the only currency on the planet that is virtually impossible to counterfeit or hack, with a security rate exceeding 70%. In other words, no matter how hard you try, it's impossible to hack this currency. Even the simplest detection machine in the world can immediately spot a counterfeit bill, because over the past 120 years, up until today, 127 security features have been developed for the dollar to make it a currency that cannot be counterfeited or hacked. Now, usually, any story I tell you starts with an incident that happened or a date connected to the story. But this time, I wanted to start the story with a fact that might surprise you. The dollar was counterfeited, and the one who did it wasn't a giant institution or a secret organization. Just one person was able to challenge the most important financial and banking system in the entire world. And what will shock you is that the end of his story is completely and utterly unexpected, because he had every detail meticulously calculated. And with just a few strategic moves, he was able to pose a threat to the global trade market, which currently exceeds $45 trillion in total value. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of the only person who was able to counterfeit the dollar currency. The strangeness of the story isn't in the idea of counterfeiting. What's strange is how a single human being was able to threaten the FBI and the CIA. And in the end, the story will reach a completely unexpected outcome. Imagine standing in front of the head of American intelligence and he can't do anything to you. On the contrary, I won't spoil the story for you, but I promise you it's an incredible story. For those who came across this video by chance and didn't know about it, we are a family made up of 5,830,000 people. We love to learn every detail about very strange topics and learn from them. Subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. And make sure notifications are enabled on your phone so we don't lose each other in the sea of internet videos. Because as we always say, even if stories are similar, it's not the same as when I tell them to you myself. Let's begin. My Lord, expand my chest for me, make my task easy, and untie the knot from my tongue, so that they may understand my words. God, I seek refuge in you from arrogance. The first thing we need to know before we start is that today, the dollar is considered the strongest monetary system in circulation in the world. The total amount of dollars in circulation globally is $2 trillion. So if we gathered all the dollars in the world in one place, the total in cash would be $2 trillion. Of course, this amount is now distributed between individuals and banks in the markets. In addition to this, hundreds of nations around the world use the dollar as a reserve currency, for pricing and for exchange. From this, we can clearly understand that this bill was designed to be one of the most stable hard currencies on Earth. In what way? It's very difficult to counterfeit. And before we go further, we really need to understand what security system makes the dollar bill unique. The first thing you need to know is that this bill is not actually made of just paper. It's actually a specialized piece of fabric, 75% cotton and 25% linen. The second thing is the presence of a watermark embedded within the fibers themselves. This mark is integrated in a genius way that makes it impossible to counterfeit. Coming in at number 3, we have a specialized polymer security thread that glows brightly under ultraviolet light, and a distinctive color-shifting ink that changes from copper to green based entirely on your specific viewing angle. Number 4, microprinting at a size of mere fractions of a millimeter. Number 5, raised engravings that you can feel by touch. Number 6, unique serial numbers for each individual note, monitored centrally. Number 7, and finally, ongoing periodic updates to the design to keep up with any potential new threats. So, after all this, we can understand that even the smallest imperfection in one of these elements is instantly and clearly exposed. That is why, for more than an entire century, thousands of counterfeiting attempts have failed. Some of these attempts were backed by countries, and their goal was to counterfeit the dollar and cast doubt on it. But why? To finally end American dominance over global markets. And yet, these attempts all failed miserably, except for just one single person. This person did something completely unexpected. He thought, why should I just imitate the system from the outside? Let me understand how the dollar printing system works from the inside. After that, everything became easy. That's how smart he was. And what he did was complicated. Sovereign authorities around the world started to wonder, what should we do? Is it more dangerous to imprison him, or is it better to let him go free? And that's right there where our story begins. In November of the year 2008, Specifically, in a small rented apartment on the outskirts of Montreal, Canada, there was a person sitting with an old $20 bill in front of him. He was intently examining the bill with a magnifying glass stuck to his eye. He was taking detailed notes and running some various tests. And how long do you actually think he kept sitting there like that? He spent 47 long and consecutive days studying that very same bill. During all that time, he meticulously examined every single tiny detail. He focused on the microscopic word, as thin as a human hair, located right next to the collar of President Andrew Jackson. The vibrant color that shifts from green to copper. If you tilt it at a certain angle, the security thread buried between two layers of printing, at a distance measured in millimeters. The man tried to study everything about the currency, but the actual underlying problem wasn't with the printing process or the ink. The problem was with the paper itself. As we said, the dollar isn't actually paper, it's fabric. This fabric is a blend of 75% cotton and 25% linen. So, where is this fabric manufactured? Well, sir, there is actually only one company in the world that has been producing this dollar paper since 1879, and it is specialized in this alone. And the company's name is Crane Currency. So if you don't have this special fabric, all your attempts will be completely exposed. With a single touch from the cashier at the very smallest supermarket, the hero of this video, Frank, was well aware of this fact, and he knew that all the counterfeiters before him had ultimately failed not because of the actual printing process. They failed because of the fabric. That's why he didn't intend to imitate the paper. He intended to manufacture the fabric itself. In a bit, everything will become clear to you. Anyway, as we said, Frank spent 47 days making dozens of observations. But the most important observation he discovered on the $20 bill was that he figured out the size, distribution, and shape of every micro-printed letter around Andrew Jackson's collar. And he memorized the angle at which the color shifts from green to copper, the number located at the bottom right. Furthermore, he calculated the exact measurement of the security thread in millimeters, which turned out to be 1.2 inches in length. This specific thread is embedded in the left edge between the second and third layers of printing. Now, the real surprise here is that Frank Bourassa, the man behind all this, was neither a chemistry PhD nor a professional printing engineer. In reality, he actually dropped out of school well before high school. A young Canadian from True River. He worked selling stolen car parts. He worked for a short period in cheap illicit substances. But this young man had two advantages. These two advantages are what separate the criminal who gets caught from the criminal whose name keeps trending all over the world. The very first thing to note is that he was extraordinarily calm and patient at all times. Even if a bomb exploded next to him, he wouldn't flinch. He used to say, "Sometimes I would stand in a line for 6 hours. I wouldn't be affected or bothered in any way. What mattered to me was that the line kept moving, that it ended, that I got what I wanted, and that I went back home." As for the second advantage, it was his keen observation, his ability to notice extremely subtle details that no one else in the world might notice. And take this as a rule. Every counterfeiter in the world who tried to imitate the dollar fell into the same trap. They thought the problem was with the ink, or the printing machine, or the hologram, or what they call the watermark. But the truth is, as we said, the problem is with the paper. Okay, let's suppose we went to Crane Currency, which is located in Dalton, Massachusetts, and told them we wanted this paper. What would they say to us? They would tell you, unfortunately, this formula is secret. The fabric used for the dollar is protected by a full federal apparatus inside the company. Every sheet is monitored from the moment it's manufactured until it reaches the official printing press. So if you honestly try to play dumb and actually go ask them for this specific piece of paperwork, they simply won't give it to you. And not only that, simply inquiring about this fabric will get you arrested on the spot because the federal security there has absolute and total authority. And since you asked about this fabric, they'll definitely consider you a counterfeiter. So what's the solution? Listen closely, my brothers. Frank had just one single critical loophole. This high-quality banknote paper isn't an exclusive invention belonging only to the Americans. Almost all central banks in the world use nearly the exact same type. It is cotton blended with linen and special fibers, treated with secret chemicals. There are dozens of highly specialized manufacturing factories in Europe that legally manufacture it for exclusive government contracts. It's true that it's protected with the same level of security as in America, but in a way, things are a bit easier there. Frank didn't want to steal the paper. He wanted to buy it, but not under his own name. The important thing is, between December 2008 and January 2009, he made calls to all the factories that work with this fabric. With every factory he spoke to, he used a different name and a unique new identity, Libet. But the particular name that he used most often was Jackson Maxwell. He claimed to be the purchasing manager at a firm known as Keystone Investments Limited. He had his story ready. He would tell them, "We are now in the process of issuing highly secure corporate bonds, and we need premium cotton paper with anti-counterfeiting features." He used highly technical talk that was convincing enough to avoid any suspicion. However, the first 23 factories, from the very first email and phone call, just hung up on him and never responded. Other factories even went so far as to threaten to report him to the local authorities. Any normal person would be scared and stop right there. But Frank, with every single phone call he placed, would develop and refine persuasive new measures to convince the next factory. He created a professional website for the company and registered a British phone number for contact. He printed official documents and a logo. He created a licensed professional letterhead for the company. With these steps, he now had a complete entity. And all of this while he was sitting in a small apartment in Canada. He started calling Switzerland on February 3rd, 2009. A relatively small company called Arthos was thoroughly convinced by what he said and formally agreed in principle to have discussions with him. As a first step, the company asked him to find out what the required specifications were. Ironically, Frank did not expect that the company would agree to or accept his request. But that's not how it is. He was very clever and did not give them all the specifications at once so that he would not be exposed. He told them, "I have only one request, that the fabric you want to give me be 75% cotton, and 25% of it is linen." The important thing is, after 5 days, the company replied to him with approval. So he went and made his second request to them. He told them he wanted the fabric to be chemically treated with certain substances, which he specified to them, of course, without mentioning the reason. The purpose of these substances he requested was to make sure the fabric would not react with iodine detection pens. A few days later, approval came again, so he made a third request that each sheet should have a custom watermark. They told him, "We agree, but we need the design, dear." He told them, "No problem, give me a few days and I'll send you the design." Here, he reached the last and most dangerous request. A few days later, he sent them an email saying he wanted a polymer security thread woven into the paper, with micro printing on it that reads USA 20. He told them that what he meant by this printing was the denomination of the bond. Logic says that the story is obvious and that this code, USA 20, would expose the whole matter. But the strange thing is that Arthos company agreed and sent an official email confirming that they had approved all the client's requests, and that these requests were specifically and exclusively intended for Keystone Investment Limited, the company where Frank was allegedly employed at the time. How much did all of these various requests actually cost? It was only $35,000 for the specialized watermark mold, which is manufactured in Germany and then shipped directly to Switzerland. Frank transferred the total amount through a complex and intricate maze of various shell companies so that no information could ever lead back to his real identity. But even so, he was risking absolutely everything because a single employee's mistake or a single security question could make his entire plan collapse. On top of that, if the matter was exposed and he was caught, the authorities would keep pressing him until they uncovered his real identity and arrested him. But what's strange is that everything went smoothly. What you should know is that the order actually took approximately 7 months, until December of 2009. Arthos company sent an email to Frank saying they were ready to start production. This means that we now have every single one of the necessary tools and we're just waiting for approval to begin printing the fabric. The first thing Frank did was officially request a small quantity. He told them this was just for inspection, and if the shipment matched the specifications he requested, they would continue working. So, how much would the quantity Frank requested be enough for? Since the quantity was just for testing, exactly how much currency could he actually print from it? Well, the amount he ordered was more than enough to print a staggering total of $250 million. Anyway, they requested that he immediately transfer the payment for the shipment, which was $50,000. Frank put every single penny that he had carefully saved or even stolen over 15 years into the transfer. He said, either the shipment arrives and I become the most dangerous counterfeiter in America's history, or I get caught and spend 30 years of my life in a federal prison. Moving forward with the story, in January 2010, the company finally got in touch with Frank and told him that the paper had been printed and they would send the shipment to Montreal. And indeed, after 20 days, a massive heavy wooden shipping crate was placed in a full shipping container and sent to Montreal. And here is a very important question to consider. What exactly could happen if Canadian customs officials opened a container full of high-quality banknote paper, and this paper was going to a person who didn't even exist? What will surprise you is that this container had a small mistake at first, a mistake that didn't show up right away, but later caused a disaster. I'll tell you about it later. Anyway, for now, let's continue. On January 7th, 2010, the shipment arrived at the port of Montreal. Frank never went near the port at all. He was standing on the roof of a parking garage about 300 meters away. He had a pair of high-powered binoculars in his hand and was desperately trying to spot his money container among the thousands of metal shipping containers stacked high in the yard. The guy was absolutely terrified because his entire future was in there. Anyway, 5 pallets carried unmarked boxes, which were labeled as specialized high-quality paper products. Customs officers have the right to open any container without permission and without any reason. So if an inspector cut the seal and pulled out just one sheet, the moment he touched it, he would know what was going on. If he held it up to the light, he would see Andrew Jackson's face appearing among the fibers. And here's where Frank made a smart move. 3 days before the shipment arrived, he and 2 of his partners conducted surveillance of the port. They divided the time among themselves. They memorized the patrol routes. They knew which inspector was in which area. They learned how long random inspections take and when they happen. They planned 3 escape routes, and they had a story ready in case the container got caught. The purpose of the story was just to distract them for 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes were enough for them to disappear and escape. And I'll say it again, all these plans would have been worthless if even one inspector had decided to open the container. But fortunately, the container passed through the gates without any inspection. Frank didn't feel truly safe until the truck was a full 40 kilometers away from the port. The truck finally arrived at a side road by a rented storage warehouse in the city of Petro River. Even then, he didn't touch it. He left it for a full 4 days without going near it. He would pass by the warehouse at random times, watching, circling around, checking if there were any strange cars or anything watching the place. He knew that sometimes the shipment gets through, but the surveillance comes afterward. Once he was 100% sure that no one was watching him, he entered the warehouse. He cut the seal and opened the box. The paper looked normal, white, not yellowed, with no printing on it. But the moment he touched it, he knew his plan had worked. The texture was both rough and smooth at the same time, and it was firm, not like any commercial paper. Then he held the paper up to the light. Andrew Jackson's face appeared from within the fibers, not printed on the surface. A special polymer thread was embedded vertically deep inside the fabric structure. The code USA 20 was repeated in microscopic size. He crumpled the paper in his hands to hear its sound. The sound was exactly like that of real dollars. But in your opinion, how did the company agree to all these conditions? First, the company is certified and the transfers are legitimate. Therefore, if there is any mistake, it would be easy to pursue it legally or go after the company, and they could be arrested instantly. The other thing is that these papers will be used to print bonds worth millions of dollars. That's what they were told. So it's completely normal for the security features of this paper to be designed like those of the dollar. You could say that the factory fell for the respectable legal paper trick and ended up making American currency for an ordinary person. And there wasn't a single security agency in the world that knew it existed. But Frank still hadn't started yet. Now he has the material, but it's just a blank canvas. To print $250 million, a home printer just won't cut it. He needed something that could only be found in government printing presses. In other words, he wanted to pull off forgery on an industrial scale. And this is where most counterfeiters fail. They print a few $1,000s with inkjet printers, spend them at gas stations, and get caught within weeks. But Frank didn't want thousands. He wanted hundreds of millions. As we said, hundreds of millions can't be printed with an ordinary home printer. It required equipment more expensive than the homes of many people. It required expertise he didn't have, and it needed a place where neither neighbor, nor police, nor even a satellite could see it. This is where Frank entered a new phase. The cost of this phase was $300,000, and the preparations would take 18 months. What did he do, and how did he continue? At the end of the first month of 2010, a 40-acre farm outside the city of True River. The farm was basically an abandoned barn that he bought in cash and registered under a fake name. From the outside, it looked like an abandoned place, but inside, it housed a printing press that could rival a mint. At the center of this operation was a high-speed Heidelberg offset printer that could print in 4 colors. It's the same type used by official currency printing presses around the world. He bought it used from a print shop that had declared bankruptcy. Its price was $125,000 in cash, and it weighed 6 tons. Transporting it simply required a flatbed truck and a rented crane. He convinced 4 workers that they were moving ordinary packaging equipment. But this printer alone wasn't enough. He installed industrial dryers, precision cutting machines accurate to the millimeter, ultraviolet treatment stations. They used a special device to carefully apply ink without changing the color. The ink was not the gray-green type. It was almost the same formula used by the US Bureau of Engraving and Printing. He brought it from 3 different continents. It consisted of color-shifting metal and inks that react to UV. If you notice, he was building a factory, not just a counterfeiting room. The game moved from a small apartment to a full-scale industry. And now the question isn't whether he'll succeed. The question is how much he'll succeed before he gets caught. Because you're working in the most dangerous industry in the world. The total investment he made reached $300,000. Every single dollar he earned from his various thefts or borrowed was carefully placed inside a barn in the countryside near Quebec City. Either the plan succeeds and he prints a fortune, or it fails and he loses everything. Here, a new problem appeared for him. He bought the equipment, but he doesn't know how to operate it. Offset printing at this level requires years of training. The process of color calibration alone can take several months to complete. One tiny mistake in the device settings would make the dollar he wants to print look fake at first glance. Frank did what he always does. He didn't try to become an expert. He bought an expert. He brought him in through his connections. A professional print operator. There was a man who used to run a legal print shop before he went to prison for an entirely different legal case. This person became the official technical director and taught him everything. The density of the ink, precise plate alignment, minute micron differences. These are the tiny details that distinguish a counterfeit bill from a real one. Their first experiments turned out disastrous. The colors were overly saturated. The color registration was off. The printing was slightly misaligned by a millimeter. The security thread wasn't in its precise place. Each and every time, Frank would burn every failed bill and start the whole process over from scratch. For 3 whole months, the printing press produced nothing but failed bills. There was not a single usable bill. He stayed in this state until April of 2010. The Heidelberg worked, and it produced the first perfect $20 bill. He put it next to an original bill and could not tell any difference at all. Neither a lamp, nor an iodine pen, nor a magnifying glass, nor anything else could reveal the difference. The watermark was perfect. The color-shifting ink changed from copper to green at the precise angle required. The weight was completely identical. The sound was identical. He carefully tested it in every way he knew, and it passed every test. From April until December of the year 2010, he had successfully printed a total of 12.5 million $20 bills. Their value was $250 million. Frank gathered all the currency he had printed, put them in 47 wooden boxes, and stacked them in another barn on the same property. This amount of counterfeit currency is the largest in world history. No one before him had ever reached this amount of counterfeit money. But the real secret wasn't in the quantity, it was in the method. Frank didn't spend a single bill himself. Not a single bill. And here lies the difference between an amateur and a professional. The amateur takes $20 and goes to a gas station with it. $50, and he goes to a restaurant with it. Within weeks, cameras, witnesses, and serial numbers will reveal the amateur counterfeiter's identity, and his story will be over. But the professional becomes a wholesaler, selling the entire batch at a huge discount to organized gangs, letting others take on the risk of distribution while he collects clean money. Frank's price was 30 cents for every counterfeit dollar. That means every million in counterfeits he sold would get him 300,000 real dollars. Why? Because of the incredible quality of the product he had. But these sales weren't random. Frank put his trust in only one intermediary. Through him, there were 3 organized crime networks in 3 countries. The rules were clear. Not a single bill was to be distributed inside Canada, nor any bill in the northeastern United States. And most importantly, the batch had to enter circulation outside the continent first: Europe, Asia, anywhere that doesn't have advanced capabilities to detect the pattern. What he wanted was that if a counterfeit 20 bill was spent in Europe and got discovered, the authorities would never be able to trace it back to a farm in Quebec, Canada. That's why, even if the batch he sold was discovered, his business wouldn't stop and would continue after a while. More importantly than all of this, no one was ever going to catch him. Between 2010 and 2012, Frank moved nearly $50 million in counterfeit money. His net share was $15 million real dollars. He deposited this money into offshore accounts in Panama and the Cayman Islands. Frank was living his life normally. He kept living in the same apartment and driving the same car. The only change in his life was that he stopped selling marijuana. Why would he risk a drug case when he already had millions? But there was one thing Frank didn't know. March of 2012. An alert bank employee in Las Vegas noticed something very unusual. A single deposit consisted of 11 $20 bills. Every one of the bills had the exact same serial number. The same number was repeated 11 times. These particular bills weren't from Frank's batch. Frank never repeated numbers. He never would have done that in his life. But what Frank didn't know was that there was an idiot in the distribution chain who was copying from his own copy. He made the one mistake Frank had spent years of his life avoiding. At this point, the Secret Service intervened, launching an extensive official investigation they called Operation Sunset. Initially, they thought it was North Korea or Iran. The quality was higher than any known gang's capabilities. Out of all those 11 different bills, there was actually one specific bill that had reached a stage called supernote. This is considered the highest level of counterfeiting a human can achieve. Historically, no one has ever reached it, an unbelievable level that requires the resources of a nation. At this point, the investigation expanded to a global scale. The big surprise was that a drug raid near Montreal uncovered a stash of the very same 20s. They arrested the drug dealers who were carrying the exact same supernote that was caught at the bank. The investigation started to confirm that the operation was in northern Canada. Quietly, a joint team was formed between the American Secret Service and the Canadian RCMP. They started following the patterns. They arrested small-time distributors. They mapped out the flow of money back to the source point. By the end of 2012, they were certain that a massive counterfeiting factory was operating in Quebec. This factory was pumping out millions, but they didn't know who was behind it or exactly where it was. At the same time, one of the 3 wholesalers working for Frank got caught in another case. The police made a deal with him. They told him the price of your freedom is to give us the source. But Frank never let anyone know where his farm was. Now, the question I want you to answer in the comments before we continue. How did they get to the barn without seeing a single bill inside? Suppose I told you that Frank was arrested. What did he have with him? That made the US government later back down from the biggest counterfeiting case in its history. Write your answers in the comments so we can see how much each of us can think outside the box like this criminal. What I want to tell you is that there are great details from this story that, to this day, have not been revealed. Frank was extremely smart, and no one was able to pin any charge on him. Even when the counterfeiting operation started to unravel, he wasn't the reason. The stupid distributor was the reason. He made copies of one of Frank's pieces. After a long investigation, the Canadian police were able to suspect Frank. Little by little, he became the prime suspect in this case, but without any evidence. On May 14, 2012, in a rented house outside True River, Frank brought a box that contained $1 million in $20 bills. This was the biggest individual deal he had ever made. The buyer was someone he had never seen before. He belonged to a motorcycle gang in Ontario. They had a distribution network in Europe. The buyer looked like a professional. He was asking the right questions. He knew the terminology. Every sentence he spoke showed a deep knowledge of smuggling and distribution networks. And why did the buyer know all this information? Because, simply put, he was an undercover officer from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and the entire house was surrounded by a specialized joint team, consisting of members from the Secret Service and the Canadian RCMP. They spent 4 months building the case. Frank walked right into the trap after he brought the box into the house. The buyer welcomed him, inspected the goods, and asked about the price. Frank told him, $300,000 for this million. The buyer nodded his head. He reached for the phone as if he was about to confirm the transfer. He said just one word. He said confirmed, meaning he gave them the go-ahead. At that exact moment, the front and back doors of the house burst open. Flashbang grenades went off in the kitchen and the hallway. Heavily armed officers. They entered from every direction. Shouts in French and English. Frank was on the ground before he could even process what was happening. In an instant, his hands were tied behind his back. After 40 minutes, a second team raided the barn where the printing machine was kept. The machine was still warm. He had operated it that morning. They found cutting tools and barrels of ink, printing plates. They found almost $1 million ready, and $2 million that hadn't been cut yet, but there were another $200 million that they couldn't find any trace of. The interrogation was extremely harsh. The Canadian charges alone could have gotten him up to 14 years in prison, but the Americans wanted him even more than the Canadians did, according to US federal law. The scale of the operations he carried out would get him 60 years in prison. What you need to know before we continue is that the shipping container that transported the printed paper to the port of Montreal, the wooden boxes that contained the blank paper, there was something unusual written on them. They were clearly labeled as paper designed for the printing of $20 banknotes. How did no one ever notice that sentence? No one knows how the company that printed the paper wrote such a sentence, and no one noticed it either. No one knows if you think about it logically. This whole story should have ended before it even started. But glory be to God, Frank managed to print $250 million and spend $50 million without anyone suspecting him. Okay, but there were still $200 million that he hadn't spent. Those $200 million had a different story. I'll tell you about it in a little bit. In the Supermax prison, Frank was locked up in a very bad isolated cell for a week. He wasn't allowed to meet anyone or see the light, and on the surface the story was over. But what no one knew was that in reality, the story was just beginning. All Frank did in prison was ask for a lawyer for just 18 months. While he was in a detention center in Montreal, the prosecutors were preparing the case file because his case was extremely huge. The United States was preparing an official extradition request. The public attorney told him to confess. Maybe they'd reduce the sentence, but Frank refused. He was calculating something that no one else had noticed. They confiscated the equipment and dismantled the distribution network. They arrested 14 people in 3 countries, but they recovered less than 2% of the amount. Less than 2%. That means 98% of the amount remains. No one knows where it is. More than $200 million are still hidden, kept in a place that only one person knows about. As long as these papers exist, Frank is a direct threat to people's trust in the dollar. Imagine the scene from Washington. 200 million supernotes, counterfeited with unbelievable precision. No one could tell they're counterfeit. Imagine even the Federal Reserve couldn't distinguish them in a lab. These 200 million are stored in an unknown location. So if he goes to prison tomorrow or in a year and this money comes out, it'll be sold, flooding entire markets. The damage wouldn't just be financial, it would also be damage to the trust in the dollar. As we all know, the only real capital the dollar has is trust. People's trust that this currency is strong and cannot be counterfeited. Frank knew this perfectly well, and he knew that they knew it too. In his cell, he wrote a formal offer to hand over the secret location of all the paper and the remaining spare printing plates. In exchange, they would charge him with a lighter offense, a sentence equal to the time he had already served. Meaning, I've already served these 18 months. All right, I'll give you the paper and you set me free. And America withdraws the extradition request and I walk out a free man. His lawyer told him, "You're crazy. No one is going to agree to that. Governments don't negotiate with counterfeiters." Frank, and this is documented in the confession records. He told him just one sentence. He said, "The government has never dealt with a counterfeiter who can threaten its currency from inside his cell." Anyway, on December 3rd, 2013, inside a meeting room at the Palace of Justice in Montreal, Frank sat across from 4 Canadian prosecutors, an American assistant prosecutor, and his own lawyer. His extradition hearing to the United States is supposed to be scheduled for next week. His lawyer presented them with the deal. The American prosecutor laughed and told him this offer is ridiculous. He reminded them that counterfeiting is a federal crime with a mandatory minimum sentence. He told them that negotiating with criminals opens a dangerous door, and that the United States does not give in to blackmail. Frank suddenly interrupted him and said, "The $200 million in supernotes are in a place that only I know about if I'm extradited to America. The location won't remain a secret. My partners don't know the address, but sooner or later they'll find it. They'll sell it to the highest bidder within 18 months. These notes will flood Asia, Europe, and America. The damage to the trust in the dollar will be greater than any satisfaction. You'll take him out of his prison." Anyway, the negotiations lasted for 6 weeks in January 2014. The deal became clear. Frank pleaded guilty to one relatively minor criminal charge under Canadian law. The sentence was a period of just 6 weeks of detention, a fine of $1,300. America would withdraw the extradition request. In return, he would hand over the full $200 million, the spare printing plates, and a second Heidelberg press he had hidden as a backup. Imagine, a counterfeiter negotiated with the most powerful country in the world, and not only did he negotiate, he won the negotiations. The delivery date was set for January 31st, 2014, and the police pulled a very smart move. They released Frank 4 weeks before his scheduled release date. During this period, the Canadian surveillance teams never left Frank alone. Quite simply, he was out of prison on bail before handing over the press and the $200 million. The Canadian police followed him everywhere he went, on every street. They thought he might slip up and lead them to the location, which would blow the whole deal. But Frank was 2 steps ahead of them. Even before he made his offer, he had already arranged to transfer the goods to someone with no criminal record and whose name wasn't mentioned in any file. He rented a warehouse under a fake name. He loaded 10 large boxes onto an old commercial truck and parked it behind a big, abandoned hotel on a highway. Frank never went there, not even in the direction of that place. He waited until the morning of January 31st. A convoy of unmarked cars with no license plates took him to the hotel parking lot. Legally, he became a free man according to the agreement. He pointed with his hand and told them, "That's the truck," a rusty metal container in the corner. One of the officers handed him a bolt cutter. Frank cut the lock and opened the door from floor to ceiling. There were cardboard boxes filled with tightly wrapped bundles of 20s. An investigator climbed inside. He opened a random box. He turned on a UV light. The security thread glowed perfectly. The watermark was flawless. The ink shifted from copper to green at the right angle. This was Frank's special supernote, the largest counterfeit bust in American history. It took 4 full hours and 3 extra trucks just to transport the money to a secure warehouse. Frank was standing next to his lawyer's car. 2 months later, he walked into a courtroom in Montreal. He paid a $1,300 fine in real cash and walked free. In the same courthouse, journalists asked him, "Do you regret it?" He told them, "Of course I don't regret it, because thanks to this great opportunity, I now work as a consultant with security companies in the field of anti-counterfeiting. The man who printed hundreds of millions now teaches governments how to stop people like him." The Secret Service spent 3 years just to catch him. In an instant, they turned into his students. In short, he's a criminal too smart to imprison, too dangerous to ignore, and too valuable not to put to work. To this day, Frank lives in Quebec without a single charge against him. Supernotate continued to circulate around the world for years after his arrest. Estimates say that about $50 million are still out there to this day, passing through our hands without us even noticing. The US Treasury Department redesigned the $20 bill twice after his case. It now has new security features and more precise details. But there's a question that no one in Washington likes to hear. If Frank were to come back today, or if someone like him appeared, would the new features they added to the $20 bill stop him? That was our story for today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're interested in strange stories like this video, I recommend you watch the McDonald's scandal video because the scam that happened there is unbelievable and defies logic. Tell me your opinion in the comments. Have you ever come across a piece of Frank's work? Because, by the way, millions of dollars of Frank's work were distributed in our region. I'll read all your comments. I'm Sadek. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye for now, and I'll see you again in a new video.